Welcome to Map Mysteries, the case file series where infrastructure tells the real story. If you drive north on the I-805 and take the exit at 43rd Street, you'll see something strange. There's a massive concrete flyover, a 10-story bridge that swoops over the road below and dumps into a shopping center parking lot. It's impossibly large for where it leads. You drive up expecting a freeway. Instead, you get asphalt and cars parked at a strip mall. Here's what the map shows. This ramp was supposed to connect to a highway running through southeast San Diego, linking the I-5 directly to the I-805, the State Route 250, also called the Toyon Freeway or the South Crest Freeway. It was planned, partially built, then deleted from the state highway system entirely. Those ramps you're looking at are the receipts. Physical evidence of a freeway that was supposed to exist, but never did. How does a massive infrastructure project get halfway built and then just disappear? The answer lives in the documents. A neighborhood fought back hard enough to stop it. Here's what actually happened. To understand why those ramps are even there, you have to go back to the 1960s and see what Caltrans was actually trying to solve. In the 1960s, the merge of the I-5 and the I-805 near National City was a bottleneck. Trucks, commuters, and regional traffic all funneled into the same spot, and the system was buckling. Traffic engineers looked at the problem and sketched out a solution, a 1.8-mile bypass connector called the Toyon Freeway, or SR-252. It would run through southeast San Diego, connecting the I-5 directly to the I-805 without forcing everything through the downtown merge. On paper, it made sense. In 1968, the city council voted unanimously to approve the route. The master plan documents showed the engineering logic clearly. Regional traffic studies predicted growth. The dominant planning philosophy of that era was that freeways solved congestion. This wasn't malice. It was the dominant belief. According to California Highways and the AA Roads Wiki, the official route designation was set, and construction was targeted for 1974 and 1975. But first came land acquisition. In the late 1960s, Caltrans started seizing property in Southcrest using eminent domain. The state had the legal power to take the land, so they did. They began clearing the corridor where the freeway would run. By the early 1970s, something shifted. The neighborhood started to organize. Residents began showing up at meetings. Community leaders began asking questions about who was being asked and who was being told. The unified pro-freeway narrative fractured. The engineering dream collided with a single fact. People lived in that corridor. Lots of them. Caltrans seized 66 acres in Southcrest and demolished 280 homes. From the air, you can see the cleared land, a gap where a neighborhood used to be. It's a visible scar. One moment there's a neighborhood full of blocks and buildings. The next moment there's empty space. The state had the right of eminent domain. They used it. But this wasn't empty land waiting to be cleared. Southcrest was a thriving black neighborhood with its own economy. Small businesses operated there. Families owned homes. There were schools, churches, grocery stores, places where people worked and knew each other. The corridor wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a place to be lived in. The resistance organized quickly. The Black Federation emerged as the focal point. They weren't just protesting the freeway on principle. They aggregated the numbers. They showed the projected tax revenue that would vanish once the cleared land sat abandoned. They documented the businesses that would be displaced and the long-term decline that would ripple through the neighborhood. This wasn't NIMBY politics. This was economic analysis backed by data showing exactly what the community would lose. At city council meetings, residents testified. Leon Williams and others stood up and said no. The oral histories from that era, recorded by KPBS and preserved in the San Diego History Center's Lost Neighborhoods exhibition, capture the voices of people who watched their neighborhood get marked for demolition. They weren't asking permission to exist. They were refusing erasure. Despite the opposition, Caltrans built the ramps anyway in 1975. The massive concrete structure went up. The state had the power, the money, and the legal authority. The neighborhood had testimony and data. The neighborhood lost that round. The ramp stood as a physical reminder of something broken in the planning process. A decision made without the people who would live with the consequences. But something else was happening at the state level. The Reagan administration's transportation priorities shifted. By the late 1970s, the political consensus on urban freeways began to crack. Jerry Brown took office, and the calculus changed. The California Transportation Commission started looking at the SR-252 project differently. In 1978, the city council reversed its position. The same council that voted unanimously in 1968 now voted to stop the freeway. By 1980, the CTC officially canceled the project. The documentation exists: city council minutes, cancellation orders, the paper trail of a reversal. Coverage in the San Diego Union Tribune tracked every step of the fight, from the 1968 approval through the final cancellation. By 1994, SR 252 was legislatively deleted from the state highway system entirely. It wasn't a highway anymore. It was removed from the books. The ramps at 43rd Street remained, standing for years, leading nowhere. California Highways and the CTC archives document every step of the reversal. The community didn't win permission to exist. They won the right to stop what would have erased them. The freeway was canceled, but the state still owned cleared land in the middle of South Crest. It sat there. For years after 1980, the corridor remained empty or barely used, a gap-toothed void where a neighborhood used to be. The land itself was the problem now. It was seized, it was cleared, and then it had nowhere to go. But slowly, something different started to happen. The community didn't wait for the state to decide what came next. They began to reclaim the space. The transformation happened gradually. The cleared corridor of the 1970s slowly filled in again through the late 1980s and into the present. Empty land gradually filled in again, but not with a freeway. What got built instead tells you everything about what the neighborhood actually needed and what the state should have asked for in the first place. Cesar Chavez Elementary School went up on part of the land. Northgate Market, a grocery store, opened in an area that had become a food desert after the corridor clearance scattered the original businesses. Parks appeared. Residential development returned. These weren't random projects or consolation prizes. They were deliberate responses to the gaps that the freeway plan had created. The land that Caltrans had seized in the name of solving regional traffic became a school where kids learned, a market where families shopped, green space where people could sit outside and breathe. The economic recovery didn't happen overnight, but it happened. The tax base that the Black Federation said would disappear didn't disappear. It came back, differently shaped, but rebuilt on community terms instead of engineer specifications. The ramps themselves never carried traffic. That 10-story concrete structure at 43rd Street remained standing, but it became something else entirely. It became a historical marker not to progress or engineering achievement, but to a community that said no to erasure and meant it. They forced the system to listen. The San Diego History Center's Lost Neighborhoods exhibition documents this progression, with photographs, newsreels, and mapping built in partnership with UC San Diego researchers. You can see the timeline of what came back. SR 252 isn't ancient history. It's a case study in how infrastructure decisions actually get made and who ends up paying the cost. It's about power, who has it, how they use it, and what happens when people organize to challenge it. It's a story about who gets a say in decisions that reshape their neighborhood. Southcrest residents weren't asked. Then they fought back. The ramps still stand at 43rd Street. They don't connect to anything. They're useless to traffic engineers. But they're valuable to anyone who wants to understand what really happened in this city. The ramps at 43rd Street and the I-805 are evidence of a neighborhood that refused to disappear. Southcrest didn't get the freeway, but it survived. The community reclaimed the land and rebuilt on its own terms. A 1968 vote, a 1975 half-built monument, a 1980 cancellation. A neighborhood that came back. This is what the receipts show. A system that harmed, a community that fought, and land that came back to life. More case files are coming. Stories where the documents tell you what actually happened, not what anyone wanted you to believe. Share this with someone who thinks infrastructure just happens.